Welcome back for all of our listeners. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Kimberly, your host, and this is The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. So today I'm having a guest with me, and I'm super excited to be introducing her to all of our listeners here. This is Carrie Paxton, and she's from Central US. Carrie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I live on the mid-east coast of the US. I guess that would be the correct way to describe it. And let's see, I'm a mom. I have two girls. They are 5 and 7. I currently homeschool my girls. I unschool specifically, if anyone knows what that term means. If they don't, that's okay too. I run a homeschool co-op. I have a small business focused on getting families with young, like grade school age children outside more. I have a tutoring and coaching business for teens and young adults to help them find their path to be more successful in school. Although I will tell you, I am on the way of closing that business. We might get into that when we're talking. And yeah, I don't know. Did I miss anything? Oh, before all of that, before I became a mom and started all those businesses, I was a classroom teacher, both public and private schools, general and special education. And I've taught a little bit of everything in some setting or another from, kindergarten through college level. But I spent most of the time at like the 2nd through 6th grade level. So talking about like 7, 8-year-olds to 11 years old or so.
Cool. Very cool. I know I was really excited for us to talk today because I feel like we have so much in common, from different life stages, of course, but so much in common, from beliefs and things that we put into practice on the daily. I was actually going to ask, what is your experience? What's kind of your experience with the different school systems? You said you were a public teacher and a private school teacher?
Yes. So I started out in the public school system. Actually, when I was in college, I started teaching as an intern. It was like a summer program where I was a teaching intern for the city public school system in my area for their summer learning program. And I did that for 3 years, but we were on our own. We were not with a head teacher. This was not like a student teaching experience that you might do if you were like actually an education major in college. We were given a class and we were given some curriculum, and that's what I did for 3 summers was I taught summer school. And then after that, I went through an alternative certification path, and I was teaching in the city public school system while I was earning my certification and master's in teaching. And then I switched to a private school for 7 years, maybe about 7 years. And then I went to a non-public special education school. And that is when I had a child and ended up staying home, because really my big goal in life is just to be an awesome mom. I shouldn't say just, but that's really where my heart is.
I don't think it's just, because it's always something that is, for a lot of women anyways, it's something that they aspire to be, right? And yes. Just being an awesome mom, I think, is contradictory, because you're not just an awesome mom, you are an awesome mom, period, end of story.
Yes,
it's
you're raising people.
Yeah,
it's a big job. Our future. It's a big deal.
It's a big job, especially raising them right. And so, like, with all of your experience in the public schools, because I have not met a whole lot of professionals, educational professionals, who have, I've met a few here and there, but I've not met a whole lot of educational professionals that have had the experience of schooling and of the public school, private school, or both, or whatever other alternative educational experience. And they've decided to step outside of that with their own children, right? A lot of people, I think, specifically educational professionals, they keep their kids within that system. And so I think you, in a sense, are an anomaly that way. If it's okay for me to ask you, what made you make that decision?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. It was not it was not something I knew from the beginning. In fact, growing up, I said I would never homeschool my kids because when I was growing up, homeschooling really still had that stereotype of it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are weird. Not that they were, but it had that stereotype. And, there's weird people in every kind of group.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for
And I
sure.
thought, gosh, yeah. um, I don't want that relationship with my parents. I don't want to be a mom and a teacher. But the more that I got into the school system and the more I thought, gosh, I really don't want to be part of this because I saw the system not serving the students. And then, I've been in private schools too, and I saw those not serving the students. And often I saw schools in the private setting promising to serve students and saying, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can meet your needs. This is exactly why we're here, and consistently falling short.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this both where I was teaching, but also in my tutoring business because I worked with kids in not just my state, but other states, in other counties within my state, in all the different private schools. And yes, I work with kids who need help, but it's just a pattern repeating over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
That the needs aren't being met. And quite frankly, I also thought about, gosh, I'm sending my 5-year-old, or I would be sending my 5-year-old away suddenly for, 6+ hours a day. She's been
Mm-hmm.
with me basically all her life. And then, oh, bye, see ya, you're going to school. It's like this dramatic shift just because she's a certain age. And it just didn't feel good. So the more I saw, the more I thought about homeschooling. And at one point I was thinking, oh, well, I want my children to have a school experience at least at some time because it's just such a part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to send my kids to kindergarten. And then I don't even know. It wasn't going to happen. I don't know if I had a moment where I said, no, they're not going to kindergarten, or if it just kind of slowly unfolded and we registered for homeschooling. I don't know how that moment happened. And then I was always kind of a minimalist when it came to homeschool, but anytime my daughter had to, fill out a worksheet or something, it's just complete rebellion. And more we became unschoolers, and that's what's working for us. So just to clarify, in the simplest terms, I don't do sit down lessons. I don't do curriculum. I follow my kids' interests. We just do life. Whatever is happening in our life on a given day, that's our school day.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's a good idea. I mean, I know what it is, and I know you know what it is, but maybe it's a good idea for us to kind of draw a line in the sand as to what's the difference between homeschooling and unschooling. And you kind of got a little bit into that. I think when people think of homeschooling versus unschooling, they think of unschooling children as like completely wild and like savage and not civilized. Like I feel like that's the stereotype, right? Like if you homeschool your kids at this point, it's kind of socially acceptable. It's okay, because everybody has different reasons for why they do it. But if you unschool your children, like what is wrong with you, right? And that's certainly not my opinion, because I am all for that style of alternative learning. I think it's one of the best ways to do life and to learn. But I don't think that we're quite there yet as a society in terms of the same sort of acceptance of unschooling as we are with homeschooling.
Yeah. So typically, I guess the distinction would be that unschooling is 100% child-led.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean I have no limits and boundaries for my kids. We have a lot of those, but I don't sit down and say, okay, these are the things you need to learn. For example, I'm not explicitly teaching my kids how to read. They are learning how to read because they love books and we engage with books frequently, and they want to learn how to read the books that they love so much. Now I do have a background in teaching reading and in special education. So I would say when we're interacting with books, I'm probably interjecting a little bit of that. But really my 7-year-old learned all her letters, capital, lowercase, all their common sounds. And I didn't teach that to her at all. Like, I mean, we had some learning games on her iPad, which we use very infrequently. So she must have picked it up from that, or I don't know where, but, she knows them and she's applying it and she's starting to read.
That's, I think is the biggest difference. You're right. Where if you're homeschooling, there's generally still some sort of level of curriculum or level of, like a curriculum control, or some sort of plan or lesson plans or layouts or whatever it might be, right? Yeah. There's a certain expectation that like by this time you will know these things. And then I would also argue like you will know these things for what? So that you're going to forget them like later, right? Like repetition is key. But I think that's the real power of unschooling, because you're letting your child learn, or you're letting a child learn when they are ready to learn. And I think that that's really powerful, because if somebody wants to learn, and if somebody like for example with your daughter that is, that wants to learn to read, wanting to be able to do something is a powerful motivator for actually doing it. Particularly in children, because as adults, we say, oh, I want this, or, oh, I want that, but then everything else kind of gets in the way, right? Sometimes we don't get what we want because we don't put that on a high enough priority list. But with children, they don't yet have that sort of filter of like what's appropriate to want and not want. And when you're talking about learning, I think that's a really powerful drive for a lot of them.
And everything they learn up until the moment they go to school really happens naturally. I mean, I know that some parents with their students will teach letter names or letter sounds or colors or whatever, and explicitly teach them. But if you think of most things kids learn, it just happens through their life. So I don't see it as any different to continue that, rather than stop all of a sudden, letting them learn organically and then sending them to school to sit at a desk. Now, because it's so child-led, my 5-year-old is much more likely to want to do worksheets. We have like kids' activity books at home, and she likes to pull them out and she likes to do them and, color in the letter. And that's okay. If that's how she wants to learn and engage with the world, she can do that. And I see it more likely that maybe for her, there would be some sort of more explicit, systematic sitting down, but it's on her terms as opposed to my terms.
And that's the key, is that it's on her terms, right? And even if you think about the public school system or the private school system or whatever school system it might be, if you're looking at anything that really has to do with learning in a structured, in a rigid and structured environment, you're not giving the child choice as to what they want to do, right? Or what they want to learn. And I think a really key point to be made is that if you're going to let your child learn on their own, like learning does happen naturally. If you're going to let your child learn on your own, it's also like for yourself, I'm sure you know this, having the skills to recognize that, okay, my 7-year-old wants to learn to read. Like, okay, what are some books, right? Like you're giving her the tools and the resources, and like things that she's interested in, for her to be able to want to read, right? Like you're furthering her desire. It's not like you're, that she's not into science and you're putting science books in front of her, right? If she's into like horses or I don't know, some specific animal, right? You can be like, okay, like maybe it's a good idea for us to read these books. But at the end of the day, it comes down to her choice. And I think that's really powerful. You don't get that in public school.
Yeah, exactly. I was reading an article from somewhere, can't tell you where, the other day that was talking about parenting and the strategies that parents used when they have high performing kids, like entrepreneurial kids or kids who are really excelling. And one of the things was that the parents never treated their child's hobby as a waste of time. And that's kind of how I try to live our life. When my children show an interest in something, we follow it. And I also recognize that that interest may not last. They may reach a point where they become uninterested, and that's okay. It's time for something new. I'm not going to force an interest just because we spent 3 months following it. And all of their interests are valid. Right now, they're really into snakes, and we have some books at home. We've read them a million times, so we need to go to the library and get some. Now, we're probably not going to get a pet snake because my husband's terrified of them. But there are certainly other ways that we can foster that interest.
Right.
And, eventually it will likely fade. And, if it doesn't, maybe there's a career path waiting. Or my 5-year-old is really into collecting bugs right now. So we have an empty fish tank at home, and we're going to make a bug terrarium.
Oh, you are a superhero mom. I would never do that in my house. I would never do that in my house. Oh my goodness, no. Those belong outside. But herein lies the sort of question, right? Or the principle of the matter is that you're allowing your children to learn as they are. And it's funny to me that like you pointed it out earlier, that there's this cultural sort of idea, right? That you as a parent, right? Like you get your kid, you gave birth to your child, or you picked them up from an adoption agency or whatever, like when they're young, and you get your child, and people trust you to raise a baby. Like there's no instruction, like there's no parenting manual, right? There's lots of parenting books, but there's no manual, like is how to operate a baby, right? And you get this baby, and you're just trusted to take care of it, and you're trusted to raise it during like the most vulnerable portion, really, of their life. And you're right, all of that learning happens naturally, right? Up until they go to school, they just pick up on things, right? Kids are parrots. That's why, you're not supposed to like say certain things or do certain things in front of them, because they're parrots, and they repeat things, or they see things, and they'll pick up on those things because they're learning. They're in a constant learning stage because their brain is expanding. And then at 4 years old or 5 years old, depending on when your child's birthday is, they just like pack them off to school. Like that's just the cultural norm, right? Like, is it because like it's a cultural, it's almost like this cultural sort of schema that we've adopted as a society because that's just the way things are done. But when you think about it, like there's this myth, I think, that like, oh, I need to send my children to school because I can't teach them because I don't know any better. But you did it for the first 5 years of their life. What's going to be any different?
Yeah, exactly. Right? I think it also, in addition, becomes a lot about childcare. Because, we both live in places where often there are two parents working, and what are we going to do with the kids? So while my teacher friends hate the idea, and I hate it too, but really school is childcare. I've heard so many parents say, well, I wish I could homeschool my kids, but I have to work.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to send them to school. And it is, like you said, it's a schema. It's just what we do. But if you think about it in terms of the invention of the world and civilization, school is a relatively new thing. But at the same time, it's kind of been around for a while, and our society has changed a lot, and school hasn't changed with it. It's still pretty much the same thing that it used to be. We've gotten a little past the one-room schoolhouse where everybody's learning together, but it hasn't really changed.
Yeah. And I think too, when you look at how society is set up, you're right, that's the most common thing is well, I have to work. Right? Some people have the luxury of a work from home job, and that is fantastic, but like not everyone can work from home, right? Like the factories still have to run, right? I mean, they don't have to, but now we're talking a whole rebranding of society, right? In terms of consumerism and whatnot, right? We could not have all the
Yes.
factories. We could not have all the things. We could go back to a completely agrarian way of lifestyle like it was 100 years ago. But that's a complete reboot of society. And while that is something that I think would be in my personal opinion, would be good, I don't think that it's feasible for a lot of reasons, for a lot of people. And regardless of if it actually happens or not, it's going to take a long time to get there. Because it took us a long time to go from the agrarian to the consumerist. So redoing that would take an even longer time frame, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think, though, are some sort of suggestions? Just because I want your opinion. What do you think are some sorts of suggestions that we can maybe offer to our listeners if you're wanting to kind of start on an unschooling journey, if you have the freedom or you've made the decision to do something like this, but you have no idea of where to start? What would you say to someone?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you still feel like you need to send your child to school, that's okay too. But look at how you spend your time together when you're at home. How can you set your child up to follow their interests? And those don't need to look like academic interests. It could look like playing a sport, playing an instrument, joining scouts, growing a garden, whatever it is. But back to the idea of not treating your child's hobby or passion or, just tiny budding interest as a waste of time. Those things are really valuable. And even if you think the ultimate skill that they're learning isn't that valuable, first, I'd say it is. But in the event you think it's not, there's so many other lessons going on there. So one is just let your child follow their interests. And you don't have to do that in an expensive way. It could just be reading about it or watching videos about it. But let them follow those interests. Second, if you are trying to pull your child out of school, remember that school learning, whatever you want to call it, doesn't have to happen between the hours of, 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Those are not some magical hours of when our brain turns on to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
I would say your brain is probably learning more outside of those hours.
Yes.
But learning happens all around you. And if it means that you are working and you have to find childcare for your child during the day, that's okay. They're going to be learning things during that time, and they're going to be learning things after that time. So, just being creative about how or where your child is receiving care if you are at work. Can you start a group of parents that take turns? If we're talking older kids, you don't need to be there, especially if you're unschooling. You don't need to be there to teach your child all day. Mm-hmm. Make sure they have some things to do while you're gone, and go to work and live your life when you come home.
Mm-hmm. I think the advantage too with unschooling, and even to a sense homeschooling as well, because you're more involved, but is that sort of parental involvement. And I know in my business with my students, that's a big thing that I push with my parents is making sure that you're involved with your child, because you need to be aware, regardless of whether they're in public school or private school or doing a homeschooling program or you're doing unschooling, right? If you're doing unschooling, that's the most, I would say, extreme form of parental involvement in education. But at any level, really, that you're doing it, you as the parent want to be involved in your child's learning process, in whatever ways are possible. And I think those are some really great suggestions that you offered. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think your word involvement is key there, because mm-hmm. it is different than controlling or teaching.
Yes.
You are involved, you're aware, you're giving your children access to the things they're interested in and the resources, because they probably can't do that themselves. You're involved, but you're not controlling of it.
Yeah. Well, and you as a parent want to be engaged. I always like to present it as this idea of learning with your child, right? Not teaching to your child, but learning with your child, right? And for some reason, like I think as adults, we sometimes forget like that we don't actually know everything. Sometimes I have to check myself, like I don't actually know everything, and there are still things to learn, right? Like the saying holds true, you learn something every day. I think if you become involved at whatever level with your child's education, you're going to be learning every day more than the usual person. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. My oldest has started to say to me, "Oh, mommy, you know everything." And I'm like, no. No, I most definitely do not know everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost think she's starting to see that because I do spend so much time learning with her. She almost sees me as the keeper of that knowledge, even though I definitely don't have it, and I'm helping her to find it.
Mm-hmm.
But I am very quick to remind her that I definitely don't know everything, and I am always still learning.
It's a good attitude to have. It's a very good
Yeah.
attitude to have. I think that leads to much more positive relationships in the future, just with your
Yes.
children in general. Thank you so much, Carrie. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here. I appreciate all of your insights, and it was an honor.
Love it.
That is all for this week's episode of The Parent Solution. If you have any comments or questions, either about this issue or others that have come up for you, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.